We're here at the British Museum and we're looking at Summer Trees, a small yet formidable painting painted by the Korean painter Sunam Song in 1979.
At first, this modest painting, composed of just a few brushstrokes of ink on paper, might seem insignificant, but in reality, it speaks volumes about Korean identity.
Like the name suggests, the broad, vertical brushstrokes are an abstract depiction of trees. More specifically, these trees are a group of pine trees native to South Korea.
I really like how each parallel brushstroke bleeds into each other. They almost take up the whole paper, but they stop just short of the bottom.
It may look like a little kid could paint this, but in reality, it takes a practiced hand to control the ink in such a plain yet impactful way.
We can really see here how Song explores tones through the contrast between the velvety blacks and the diluted grays. To achieve this, Song layered strokes on damp paper to create a blurry, atmospheric effect.
So, what exactly is the context of this work being made?
Our painter, Sunam Song, was a leader of the Korean Sumikwa movement in the 1980s. You're probably wondering what this movement was. Sumikwa is actually just the Korean pronunciation for the Chinese word for ink wash painting. One key characteristic of the Sumikwa movement is the use of a traditional ink and brush. The use of this traditional medium celebrates deeply rooted Korean traditions and what they mean for their culture as a whole. In fact, traditional Asian works from older times typically depicted landscape and nature scenes, which is what Song alludes to in his artwork.
So, you're saying traditional Asian art was just a bunch of blobs of paint?
Well, not exactly. While the medium and content allude to Korean tradition, the formal qualities, like the abstract forms which shape the trees, show the modern and contemporary side of this work.
So, from what I understand, this work is basically deeply rooted tradition mixed with modernity?
Exactly.
Alright. Let's go back to the trees themselves. They're obviously not a naturalistic depiction. Do you think the artist is trying to allude to something?
Right on the money. Because these so-called trees are abstract, we are left room for interpretation. The group of trees we can see could possibly symbolize a gathering of friends of upright character. Now, let's go back to how this work was influenced by traditional Chinese artworks. In another work that we studied in the curriculum, called Travelers Among Mountains and Streams, which was painted in 1000 CE, nearly 1,000 years before Summer Trees, we can see a very traditional and typical depiction of a landscape. Summer Trees was influenced by this exact type of artwork, borrowing natural elements, such as in this case, the trees. Although Summer Trees is more abstract, I feel like both artworks convey the same type of atmosphere and feeling. They're both very serene, peaceful, and in harmony with nature, which can be seen as reflecting Chinese and in general Asian philosophical ideals such as Confucianism, which emphasizes order and harmony.
Another work that this reminds me of is The Portuguese Man by George Braque, painted in 1911 using oil on canvas. Both works are abstract in nature and also leave lots of room for interpretation. For example, The Portuguese Man very clearly states in the title that it's depicting a man that is Portuguese, similar to how Summer Trees says in the title that you are looking at summer trees. And yet, for both of the works, you simply just cannot tell what you are looking at without the title. If it wasn't for the title, you would have no idea what you are looking at for either works. For example, Improvisation 28. Since there is no title, you cannot tell what you're looking at. deeming it abstract expressionism.
So what you're saying is that summer trees is just abstract expressionism?
No, not even close, in fact. You see, while summer trees is in fact abstract, it still does have a sense of order to it because of the traditional Korean ideals that the artist stems from. Abstract expressionism, on the other hand, is chaotic and often improvised. These are just some of the key differences which separates these two art styles. While they are different in many ways, they are also similar in multiple others. Most importantly, both of these artworks rely on emotion and sending a message more than the composition, form, or content of the art itself.
Now that we've unraveled everything we need to know about this painting, let's move on to the next one. That was a long journey.
I know, right?
But finally, we've made it. We're now here in the Carnegie Museum of Art in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
In front of us is a painting called Stadia 2, painted by Julie Mehredu in 2004 using ink and acrylic on canvas.
After an initial first glance at this painting, we can feel overwhelmed because there's a lot to process.
Let's begin by isolating the long undulating lines present all around the canvas. As you can see, the lines present all around the canvas form some sort of architectural skeleton, similar to possibly a sports arena of some sort.
It could also denote an amphitheater, an opera house, or a political chamber. What's important isn't exactly what it depicts, but it's the essence of what it depicts, which is our experience as a collective group in spaces like these. Let's imagine for a second an important athletic event like the FIFA World Cup or the Olympics. As we can see at the top of this painting, there are geometric shapes that are colored which loosely resemble flags. So, this could be an interpretation of how multicultural and different a collective group can be, which exposes our differences as individuals within the collective.
Or the colorful geometric forms in the air could also represent confetti of some sorts, maybe because of a celebration.
This makes sense since stadiums usually represent triumph, pride, and bold celebration. But on the other hand, they are also common targets for acts of terror such as bombing, which could be reflected in the gray marks that we see. These marks could represent smoke, which would allude to destruction. This highly contrasts with the bright colors that we interpret as confetti. So, Bishoy, can you tell me how on earth Mehretu made such a confusing and complex work?
Well, Mehretu's working process begins with projecting maps onto an empty canvas. Using these projections, the artist creates hash marks and small tallies, which slowly evolve into the creation of figures, communities, and whole buildings into a canvas.
It's important to realize that all of these elements aren't literally painted on. Instead, they're symbolically present and up for our interpretation.
You should also know that Stadia 2 is part of a triptych, meaning that this is only 1/3 of the entire message that the artist was trying to portray.
One work that this reminded me of was Improvisation 28 by Kandinsky, which was painted in 1912 with oil on canvas. So me personally, I thought that Stadia 2 kind of seemed like a 3D version of Improvisation 28. They both feature many lines on a white background with a bunch of splotches of color. The thing with Improvisation 28 is that it's much more flat, and to me, it just lacks depth. This is something that Stadia 2 really improves on. When looking at Stadia 2, we really get a sense of depth, and it almost feels like were sitting in some sort of arena and assisting a spectacle of sorts. What I found common in these two works was that they weren't representing anything specific. Instead, they are conveying an idea, emotion, which really fits into the context of contemporary art. It isn't really about the formal qualities of the art anymore, or the time it took to create that artwork. It's just more about the concept and what that symbolizes.
Another work that I connected with Stadia 2 is the Colosseum, located in Rome. And to me, it just connects with with Stadia 2 because of just the feeling that you get when you look at both of them. When you look at Colosseum, for example, you get a feeling of community connecting with each other on a deep spiritual level. And I feel as if Stadia 2 is a 3D example, almost a 3D model of that feeling that you get when you look at the Colosseum and imagine it in its prime. Even the name of Stadia 2 just connects with stadiums and, in return, the Colosseum, meaning that the artist obviously was trying to convey some sort of point in all this. Also, if you look at Mehretu's other works, you can clearly see that she was aiming for a style and she captured it almost flawlessly.
So, overall, Stadia 2 conveys to us the feeling of community, mass gathering, as well as joy, celebration, and happiness. Yet, it also juxtaposes that with possible chaos, violence, and disorder, or even the movement between these states. The beauty with Stadia 2 is that there is a multitude of interpretations that people can choose from. So it's truly an interconnected and global work that anyone across the globe could understand and appreciate.